I cheated with a married coworker and planned to leave my husband after stealing everything and getting pregnant. But he planned a perfect revenge. Now I've lost everything and my daughters hate me. My name is Juliana. I am 36 years old, and this story begins almost 2 decades ago when I was a young recent graduate in business administration. I had just been hired as an executive assistant at a medium-sized regional bank. It was then that I met Marcelo, a 28-year-old accountant, shy, methodical, and incredibly polite who had moved to the city a few months earlier. Our first meeting was not one of those love at first sight moments. It was something more contained, almost bureaucratic, organized by mutual friends during a dinner. He wore a beige shirt and spoke slowly, with the measured tone of someone who thinks twice before existing, but I was at a point in my life where I just wanted something that made me feel good, and Marcelo felt exactly that, good. At first, there was a certain tension, not sexual, but emotional. I was not exactly extroverted and used to hide my body with loose clothing as a form of protection. Marcelo respected it, or, at least, seemed to respect it. He was not invasive or insistent, and that gradually relaxed me. We had long conversations about the future, about plans, about how we both came from families with few resources, but who dreamed of stability. He talked a lot about opening his own business one day, and about being the director of a solid institution. We were in sync, although from the beginning I felt that something in his heart was always absent, as if he acted out of obligation, not out of desire. As the months went by, we started dating and everything went as usual. We met our respective families, spent holidays together, and took a trip to the countryside to get to know his roots. The marriage proposal came in a downtown cafe simply. I accepted. A year later, our first daughter, Camila, was born. 2 years later, Isabella arrived. We bought a house in the Jardin Imperial neighborhood, not luxurious, but with a good location. Marcelo bought a practical white car, ideal for taking the girls to school. From the outside, everything seemed perfect, and perhaps it was, at least for a while, because inside something was beginning to crack little by little. Marcelo was a present father. He never missed school meetings. He loved to lull the girls to sleep and even made spreadsheets for the monthly shopping, but as a husband something was missing. He was cold, methodical. He even planned our intimate moments as if they were appointments in his agenda. When I tried to improvise something, he would say, "Not now, I need to go to bed early." I began to feel lonely despite being married, and the worst part was that every time I tried to talk about it, he responded with some criticism disguised as advice. "You should be more organized. You could save more. Your way of dealing with stress is not healthy." I wanted to be loved. He wanted me to be functional. Deep down, I felt that I was becoming a roommate who cooked and helped with the bills, nothing more. I started working longer hours at the bank, perhaps as an escape. Marcelo never complained. He never asked me why I was so late. He never showed jealousy or interest. I started to dress up more, to try different perfumes, and he did not even notice. My body was changing after giving birth. I wanted to feel alive again, desired, but Marcelo was like a wall. He saw me, but he did not see me. This did not make me stop loving him immediately, but it began to sow a feeling that was hard for me to admit: frustration. And frustration, when it grows in silence, becomes a kind of poison, one that eats away little by little, without causing alarm. There was no particular fight, no betrayal, no trauma. There was only a distance that grew little by little between us until it became an abyss, and, for a while, we pretended not to see it. We pretended that lukewarm kisses were normal, that scheduled sex was enough, that the silences did not hurt. The problem is that when you pretend too much, you start to forget what it is to live for real, and it was then that other feelings began to flourish in me, feelings I knew I should not cultivate, but that made me feel something that Marcelo could no longer awaken, feelings that would make everything I had collapse. Shortly after Isabella's birth, my professional life took a qualitative leap. I was promoted to compliance manager at the bank, a position that brought me prestige, the trust of the board of directors, and access to confidential information. I was good at what I did, meticulous, demanding, and a perfectionist. I began to attend corporate events, lunches with directors, and training in other cities. My salary practically doubled in 2 years. Meanwhile, Marcelo was still at the same accounting firm, stuck in his professional routine. I could see the discomfort in his eyes, even when he said nothing. Every time someone praised me in front of him, he would smile, but inside he seemed to wither. It was during this period that he began to talk about opening his own office. He said he wanted more freedom, that he hated being controlled by mediocre bosses, and that he could build something from scratch on his own merits. I understood his desire, but I was opposed. Our daughters were still young, costs were rising, and I already bore much of the household's financial burden. I said I would not risk my salary for one of his ventures. He was silent for 2 days. In the end, he insisted. I gave in, but I made it clear to him he could manage on his own. That created an invisible gap between us, a resentment he never verbalized, but that I began to feel in every silence he kept. Marcelo opened the office. He started with 2 small clients and a poorly trained assistant who always made mistakes on the spreadsheets. For the first few months, there was hardly any income, but he seemed enthusiastic, almost obsessed. He slept late, was always stressed, and still believed he was making history. I saw it as an escape. While he was dedicated to his dream, I worked hard at the bank, taking care of the girls and the house, and continued to smile at family dinners, pretending everything was fine. When I asked him if it was worth it, he accused me of not believing in him. He called me cold, said I only thought about status. That hurt me and pushed me even further away from him. Our differences began to become apparent. While I sought security and growth within a system I respected, Marcelo wanted to break with everything and create his own rules. He believed he was a visionary. I thought he was impulsive, and he began to see me as a break, an obstacle, someone who was afraid to dream. He began to ridicule me with harsh jokes about my executive posture and my boss mode. I pretended to laugh, but inside it hurt, and it hurt even more to know that no matter how much I tried to contribute, he never saw my effort as support, only as a demand. And when he finally started earning money, the tension only worsened. He spoke as if he had won, as if he had proven something to me. He began to make it clear that he no longer needed my money. He began to question my decisions about the house, the finances, the girls. It was as if he wanted to recover a kind of masculinity he felt he had lost, and he was willing to belittle me in the process. I remained silent. I pretended everything was fine, but every comment, every look of disdain, killed the little admiration I had left for him. I no longer knew if I was married to a man or to an unresolved project with a wounded ego. Living together became a theater. We had lunch and dinner in silence. Our conversations revolved only around the girls or the house. There was no affection or shared plans, only tasks, routine, schedules. I felt lonely, completely lonely, but the outside world still saw me as the successful woman with the perfect family, the entrepreneurial husband, and the beautiful daughters. And perhaps that is why it was so hard for me to admit that this marriage was no longer my home. It was just a place where I lived out of obligation, a place where my presence was functional, but my absence would not be missed. Marcelo could no longer see me. He looked at me, but it was as if he saw a wall. No woman who shared his bed, who woke up at 5 in the morning to prepare food for her daughters, who balanced a demanding career with the demands of the home, existed for him. When I tried to express how I felt, he would say, "Juliana, I am exhausted. Do you want to talk about it now?" It was always that excuse: fatigue, worries, bills, clients. It was as if I was reminding him of the burden he bore, but I carried mine too, and he never asked me how I was. I started to feel like a ghost in my own house. That is when my outings began. At first, nothing planned, a happy hour here, an event at the bank there. The girls were becoming more independent, Marcelo was always busy, and no one asked me where I was. I also started to dress up more. I wore clothes he never complimented me on, makeup he did not even notice, and my wedding ring, sometimes I forgot it on purpose. I felt alive in those moments, even if it was just a dinner with wine and a casual chat with colleagues. It was a relief to be in environments where someone noticed me, where my name was remembered with a smile and not with a sigh of impatience. Damien appeared like a breath of fresh air. He was an account manager at the bank, 3 years older than me, always with a compliment on the tip of his tongue and a look that gave me goosebumps. It started with an exchange of messages about work, then private jokes, and soon, we were seeing each other outside of work hours. At first, I swear, it was just words. I needed to be heard, but Damien made me laugh again. He called me brilliant, said that Marcelo was blind for not understanding what he had. When our hands touched for the first time in a parking lot, my body reacted as if it were waking up from a coma. I did not think, I just felt, and I wanted to feel more. Of course, to achieve that, lies became part of my routine. I said I would participate in charity bingos organized by the bank. I said I had mandatory training in neighboring cities. Sometimes, I would say I was going to my sister's house, even though I did not have one. I hated myself for it, but at the same time, I hated the emotionless life I led at home even more. Every encounter with Damien was like a shot of self-esteem. He made me feel desired, admired, important. For the first time in years, I was the protagonist of my own story, not just an extra in the theater of Marcelo's life. But Marcelo was not a fool, or at least, not as much as I thought. He began to notice things: my new lingerie that never made it home, my different perfumes, my more cared-for skin. He once asked me if I had bought a new cologne. I told him it was a sample I had been given. Then, he commented that I had been happier lately. I told him it was because of a new campaign at the bank. He seemed suspicious, but he never confronted me. Perhaps out of fear of confirming what he already felt, perhaps out of pride, or perhaps because he himself no longer knew how to care about me. And it was in that limbo between guilt and pleasure that I continued to see Damien. I kept up appearances at home, prepared dinner, took the girls to school, and came back to life when I escaped. I knew I was treading on thin ice, I knew it was not sustainable, but I also knew that, at that moment, it was the only thing that still made me feel human. And even with the shadow of error over me, I continued because, deep down, I felt that if Marcelo really cared, he would have already done something. But he did not. And when someone does not protect you from their own absence, you end up seeking refuge elsewhere. Today I know that everything was being recorded. Marcelo, with his cold and calculating attitude, had installed hidden cameras in my house and put a recorder in the pocket of my work backpack. I found out weeks later, but during that time I still believed I was in control of everything. The truth is that he already knew. He knew what time I left, what I said on the phone, what clothes I wore when I thought I was alone. He was putting together a silent puzzle, piece by piece, while I still believed I was playing a secret game that only I knew. And the worst part, he did not confront me, he simply observed. But what Marcelo did next was what made me start to lose my balance. Without warning, the small details began to turn into disasters in my routine. I would get a flat tire every week. The car would have an oil leak in the morning that I had never noticed. The garage door would get stuck so often that I had to leave through the back street. One morning, the engine simply would not start. When the mechanic arrived, he said that some kind of liquid had been poured into the wrong place. I could never prove anything, but I began to suspect. It was as if the world was punishing me for something that only I knew, or thought only I knew. Things also began to worsen at work. I received an anonymous email with photos of me, images that should never have existed outside the hotel rooms where I had been with Damien. I was in lingerie, smiling at the camera, thinking it was something intimate, but there they were, attached to an unidentified message sent to my corporate email. I panicked. I deleted everything and prayed that no one else had received it. But over the next week, I noticed changes. I was excluded from 2 external events. I did not receive updates on projects I was leading. And a coworker I used to be close to began to avoid me in the cafeteria. No one said anything to me, but my expression said it all. It was as if something inside me was dirty, exposed, and everyone was informed except me. Even my boss, who used to be my biggest supporter, distanced himself. I began to lose access to confidential files. An important report was passed to another manager, and worst of all, One of the directors, who had always treated me cordially, greeted me with an icy smile and a "How are you, Juliana?" that sounded more like a camouflaged threat. I began to feel the fear grow. Something was about to explode, and I had no idea where the fire was coming from. It was then that I was summoned to an extraordinary meeting with the compliance department. The official excuse was a routine review, but as soon as I entered the room and saw the somber faces and the file on the table, I knew. They began with technical questions: use of bank funds, expense reports, corporate travel. But the questions quickly turned personal. Who authorized the reservation at the Mirador Hotel on 3 specific dates? Why were there records of transactions during work hours with a card that should have been in my possession? It was clear someone, and I now knew it was Marcelo, had revealed all the details of my betrayal. I stood there, not knowing what to say. They had data, images, dates, recordings. I do not know, but they treated me as if I were guilty from the first minute. I left the room with my legs trembling. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. I called Damien, but he did not answer. I sent a message, and what I received was a dry reply: "Do not call me at work." It was then that I began to understand that the situation had changed. Marcelo had not only found out. He was rewriting my story in silence, in the cruelest and most strategic way possible. And I still had no idea what else he was planning. My meetings with Damien became part of my routine. Every Tuesday, between leaving work and the time I had to go to the main office to pick up a report, we would meet in discreet hotels, usually far from the city center. We alternated bookings. One week he would book, the next I would. We used corporate bank cards with flimsy justifications for inspection trips, external meetings, compliance events. It worked, or at least, we thought it did. I felt safe, protected by the professionalism that I myself had helped to build in the sector. How ironic. The same system I was holding up was the one that was beginning to fall apart. Over time, Damien and I began to plan the future. Not the idealized and passionate future that movies portray, but a strategic, almost business-like future. Our plan was simple: wait 2 more years until Camila went to college. By then, Isabella would be 15 and more independent. Then I would ask for a divorce. Marcelo was the perfect husband in theory. He took care of the house, did the shopping, took the girls to school, and managed the accounts. He did everything I no longer wanted to do, and in the meantime, I built a reputation at the bank. I got promotions and, as cruel as it may seem, I used the stability he offered me as a comfortable cushion. We even talked about it during our dates. Sometimes, between kisses, I would say, "He does not suspect a thing. He still thinks I am tired because of the spreadsheets." And Damien would reply laughing, "Marcelo is a very bad guy." And I do not know if it was the passion of the moment or a cruelty I harbored without realizing it, but it gave me a sense of control. I remember saying out loud that he was a mediocre man, without vision, trapped in a life of spreadsheets and small dreams. What I did not know, and what I bitterly regret to this day, is that those words were being recorded. Marcelo heard them, each and every one, and he never looked at me with the same eyes again. Damien also had his own reasons for waiting. He was married to a highly prestigious criminal lawyer in the city. They had a prenuptial agreement that expired in 2 years, which gave him the right to half of her assets. It was not just passion, it was calculation, strategy. We joked that it was a parallel business marriage. 2 traders who met in the midst of burnout, 2 conspirators who pretended to love each other while making moves like pieces on a board. But what seemed like control began to turn into a trap when I realized that Marcelo was letting me hang myself with my own rope. He did not confront me. He did not scream. He did not accuse me. He simply distanced himself, and it was in that silence that he hid his most dangerous weapon: time. While I thought I was gaining ground, he was besieging me. Every recording, every receipt, every car trip, everything was recorded, timed, analyzed. Later, I discovered that he even marked the exact location of my underwear in the drawer to see if I touched it before Tuesday. He was an invisible detective, and I, the naive criminal, thought I had everything under control. But when you spend too much time conspiring, you lose the sensitivity to realize that you are being watched, and that was exactly what happened to me. Marcelo was no longer just my husband. He was the patient executioner of my downfall. Damien was the distracted accomplice, as sure of impunity as I was. And together, as we laughed at the naivety of our spouses, we had no idea that we were being slowly led to the fire lit by our own words, gestures, and decisions. Marcelo has always had a meticulous and controlled side, but I never imagined he would use it against me. But he did. He hired a lawyer who does not even smile out of courtesy and a private investigator who, as I later discovered, had already worked on municipal corruption cases. He collected all the recordings, screenshots of messages, credit card statements, the car's GPS time, images from the internal cameras. He even cross-referenced my cell phone's location history with hotel reservations. The level of organization was terrifying. He did not just want to break up, he wanted to destroy my credibility. Without me noticing, Marcelo began a true asset shielding operation. He emptied our joint account and left only what was necessary to cover the girls' basic expenses. He transferred the house to a family holding company of which he was the sole owner. He canceled our shared cards and opened separate accounts. All of this was done with discretion, meticulously planned so that I would not notice until it was too late. And it was. When the court summons arrived in my hands on a gray Friday, I could barely react. I looked at that envelope as if it were a time bomb, and it was. The process was thorough, cold, and surgical. Marcelo requested full custody of our daughters. He alleged emotional abandonment and betrayal, and presented material evidence that, according to my lawyer, was irrefutable. When I tried to react, I realized that public opinion was already on his side. My colleagues at the bank, even those who pretended to be neutral, were whispering. I was temporarily suspended from my position under internal investigation. The board of directors refused to see me. The phone stopped ringing with invitations to events and, on social media, the likes disappeared. Even my beauty salon, where I had been a client for years, began to treat me coldly. The city was too small to keep secrets. At home, the girls began to behave differently. Camila, who always hugged me when I came home from school, began to go straight to her room. Isabella, younger and more sensitive, watched me with a mixture of sadness and prejudice. Marcelo, on the other hand, became the model father who took them to the park, to the movies, to the ice cream parlor. He began to cook more, to clean the house with them, and encourage them to study. I saw everything as an intruder in my own family, and it hurt because, despite everything, I was still their mother. But his words resonated in their minds with much more force than any affection I could express. He would say subtle, but calculated things. Mommy is having a hard time, girls, and she might need space. You know you can count on me, right? I will always be here, even when they let us down. He never said it directly, but he manipulated masterfully. And I was left without arguments because, deep down, I knew I had failed, that I had cheated, that I had lied, that I had used, and now all of that was coming to light with interest and emotional correction. I tried to explain to Camila what was happening. She listened to me for 3 minutes and said, "You betrayed trust, Mommy." It had never hurt so much. And while I was trying to fix the broken pieces, Marcelo simply watched, without anger, without sarcasm, but with a terrifying calm, as if he already knew the end of the story. He would appear with his clothes ironed, the chores done, the girls' schedule organized. He was the perfect father, the serene ex-husband, the unharmed citizen, and I, the unbalanced, treacherous, and unstable woman. I screamed inside, but on the outside, I could only whisper. I was left only to react, but how do you react when you have already been condemned without the right to a defense? The annual bank ball was the most anticipated event of the year, a parade of egos, status, and vanity. I did not want to go, but I knew my absence would be talked about. I secretly bought some very expensive shoes, high-heeled ones that cost almost a third of my salary. I wanted to stand out, to show that I was still the brilliant and impeccable manager, even under investigation. My dress was black, tight, and provocative. I entered the room with my head held high. I did not know that Marcelo had adjusted my heels by a millimeter, with a slight twist imperceptible to the eye but enough to destabilize me. And it worked. In the middle of the room, in front of the board of directors and former colleagues, I tripped, knocked over a tray of drinks and 2 glass vases. I ended up on my knees, literally. The silence after the fall was worse than any laughter. I got up quickly, trying to smile as if nothing had happened, but it was too late. The next day, the video was circulating among the bank's internal groups with the caption, "The manager who tripped over her own ambition." I discovered that Marcelo had sent the clip, cut and edited, to local humor pages. Soon, it became a public joke. I received anonymous messages, disguised laughter in the hallway, looks that oscillated between pity and mockery. I became a corporate meme, not a respected professional, a walking joke. And worse still, everyone knew, but no one said anything to my face. Marcelo did not stop there. Knowing that the public damage was already done, he used his last card. He presented, through a known auditor, documents that demonstrated the misuse of the corporate card. All the hotel reservations, unauthorized trips, expenses during the week during work hours, everything was attached to a detailed report. The bank had no other option. The board of directors summoned me to a final meeting and, without beating around the bush, informed me that I had been fired with just cause. I sat in the room, listening to every word as if I were in a daze. I tried to explain myself, but no one wanted to listen. The case was already closed. Damien was summoned that same day. He received the same punishment, but unlike me, he did not have the courage to face it. He did not show up for the meeting. He sent a lawyer. When I learned that his children had found out about everything, I understood why. They turned against him and his wife, the woman he feared so much, filed a violent lawsuit, demanding the house, alimony, and the garnishment of accounts. Damien disappeared from the map. He deactivated his social media, left the bank group, and did not respond to my messages. And then I realized he was gone. He left me to sink alone. What followed was a true social lynching. I received summons for compensation. The bank demanded reimbursement of expenses. An administrative investigation was opened to investigate my involvement in the fraud. Friends disappeared. Coworkers of years ago began to cross the street to avoid greeting me. A clothing store where I had been a client for over a decade refused to accept my card for security reasons. Even the girls' school began to look at me with suspicion. The other mothers whispered in the hallways. I became toxic, unbearable, a woman in ruins and still breathing. It was as if my image had been erased and replaced by a caricature. The exemplary manager was gone. The devoted mother, now a traitor. The respectable wife, turned into scum. And Marcelo, he went on with his life as if nothing had happened. He went to the market with the girls, greeted the neighbors, attended school meetings with a serene smile and a fixed gaze. He never made a scene, he never shouted. He simply sowed the right seeds and let the world reap me as I deserved. And I could do nothing but watch my own fall in slow motion as I drowned in ignored emails and calls from lawyers. Marcelo was planning a trip. He took Camila and Isabella to a small town in the mountains, one of those with stone houses and the smell of freshly baked bread. It was December, just after Christmas. He invited me formally, as if following protocol. He said it would be good for the family, but I declined. I said I needed to sort out some pending matters at the bank, although I was already suspended. In reality, I wanted to spend New Year's Eve with Damien, or, at least, with what was left of him. Marcelo did not insist. He simply nodded with that neutral look I had learned to fear. It was on this trip that he met Vanessa, a widowed nurse, mother of 2 teenage children, who had moved to that region after the death of her husband. Her children soon became friends with Camila and Isabella. They went to the lake together, rode bicycles, and shared chocolates by the hotel fireplace. Vanessa was practical, kind, and firm. She had that look of someone who has suffered a lot but did not let the past make her bitter. Marcelo, in that atmosphere of peace that I never offered him, finally took a deep breath after years. And when he met her, there was no magic or blind passion. There was a natural, simple, real connection. The two began to talk during the trip, nothing intense, just quiet conversations, walks under the clear mountain sky. Vanessa listened without judging, asked questions without prying, gave advice without trying to fix things. Marcelo, in turn, gradually opened up. He told her part of what he had been through, not everything, of course, but enough for her to understand how much he had fallen apart inside. And the most impressive thing, she did not treat him like a victim or a hero, but as a man who was trying to rebuild himself. That moved him. It was as if for the first time someone saw Marcelo beyond the role of the betrayed husband. Upon returning from the trip, the girls felt lighter. Camila smiled more. Isabella went back to sleeping without nightmares. The house, that same house where for months the air had been permeated with tension and suspicion, seemed to breathe again. Marcelo returned to work more focused, more concentrated. He began to dedicate time to his daughters without it seeming like he was carrying the world on his shoulders. Even the neighbor's dog, who always barked at him, began to wag its tail. I watched everything from a distance, trying to understand when I had lost this man. The truth is that he was no longer mine and, perhaps, never was. Vanessa began to come to the house discreetly, first to lend books to the girls, then to help with lunch, a recipe, an invitation to go out. She never invaded, she never forced, but little by little she became present. And the most painful thing was to see how my daughters accepted her. They felt comfortable. They showed me with their bodies and gestures what they could not express with words, that there was peace there, a peace that never existed with me and Marcelo. Marcelo simply watched with that new glint in his eyes, a glint I had not seen in years and that, honestly, I did not even remember what it was like anymore. While I was being summoned by internal committees and receiving legal notifications, he was planting a new garden. While I was stirring the ashes, he was watering the flowers. And I am not saying this to be dramatic, I am saying it because, deep down, I knew it, I sensed it. He was rebuilding himself, and the cruelest thing was to realize that, although he had been betrayed, he no longer needed to hurt me, because my punishment was to silently watch the happiness he had finally found after everything I had destroyed. The divorce summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. The officer knocked on the door and handed me the envelope with the same neutrality with which a utility bill is delivered. Marcelo demanded full custody of the girls, attaching all the evidence, recordings, reports, testimonies. There was no room for dispute. I no longer had a defense, neither moral, nor legal, nor emotional. I looked at the document as if I were witnessing the reading of my own sentence in a public square. As much as I had imagined that moment, nothing prepared me for how cold it was. His name came with a direct request. He wanted his daughters, and his daughters wanted him. Camila and Isabella did not cry, they did not even scream. They just said they wanted to stay with their father. His house is quieter, Camila explained. We feel better there, Isabella added, without even looking me in the eye. They visit me from time to time, but they always seem uncomfortable. They come, they stay for an hour, they check their cell phones, they have a juice, and then they ask to leave. They do not ask how I am. They avoid physical contact. When I try to start a conversation, I get short, dry answers as if they were fulfilling a legal obligation. I understand them. I cannot blame them. They simply did what I did not have the courage to do. They moved away from me. After I was fired, no bank wanted to hire me. My name became poison. The references disappeared. The doors closed. I got a small job as an assistant in a law firm that deals with separations and child custody. Every day I see women crying, begging for a chance, regretting their inconsiderate decisions. I see fragments of myself in them, and sometimes I wonder if they see in me what they can become. I do not talk about my story, but it screams inside me with every new lawsuit I file, with every sentence I hear. I just wanted to be happy. That is what I used to say too. Marcelo, on the other hand, grew. His investments paid off. He bought a larger property in a wooded neighborhood. He opened a small private office, discreet but profitable. The girls admire him. He plans to marry Vanessa next year. Despite all the history she inherited, she never abandoned him. She was patient, firm, and serene. She knew how to welcome without forcing and to love without haste. When I saw a photo of them together on social media, a family dinner, all smiling, I realized that there was no longer a place for me in that family. It was a new family, and I was just the dust left over from the previous one. Sometimes I dream of Marcelo, not of the man who turned me in, but of the one I met in that cafe years ago, when he was just an accountant newly arrived in town. I dream of our daughters, of family breakfasts, of plans for the future. But when I wake up, I only have the moldy ceiling of my rented apartment and the silence of the room where no one else enters. I have become a shadow of myself, and there is no mirror that can hide it. The worst part is not the loneliness. It is knowing that I was the one who lit the match that set fire to everything. Today I live surrounded by memories. Every laugh of the girls that I no longer hear, every caress that Damien promised and never gave, every recorded phrase that Marcelo listened to in silence. I do not know if they will ever forgive me. I do not know if I want them to, because more than any external punishment, what hurts me the most is living with the certainty that I destroyed the only thing that really mattered, not for lack of love, but for vanity, cowardice, and a stupid ego. And now I am alone, surrounded by the ashes of my own ruin.